All right, that's neither here nor there. You mentioned today that Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, Republican Senate Majority Leader, spent $9 million on that race. I did not know that. And my question, of course,
I got to clarify it. He spent $9 million in the primary, and it was used mostly to keep a guy named Brooks out of the runoff, or at least a large part of it was. And most people thought Brooks would have been the strongest candidate in the general election. And instead, he did that to get Luther Strange in the second spot behind Moore. They didn't spend very much at all in the general election. In fact, Mitch McConnell pulled all their money away from Moore right after those allegations came out.
Well, and of course the point is, like Russians meddling in the American election, Washington is meddling in state elections. My question to you is, okay, so there was a $9 million expenditure at some point in that process, and it worked, whether it worked directly or indirectly, right?
It helped Luther Strange get into the runoff. In Alabama, what happens is you have the primary, the top two, if they don't get 50%, go into a runoff. So what the $9 million helped do was to get Luther Strange into a runoff against Moore, and then part of that $9 million was spent in the runoff. It didn't really help in that part because Moore still beat Luther Strange even with the money that McConnell put in.
But the final analysis,
it's a lost seat. The big problem is the people that give money to Mitch McConnell's super PAC, they give it to him so that he can build upon the majority in the U.S. Senate, and that means they expect that money to go supporting the Republican nominee of whoever the Republican nominee is for that state against the Democrat in the general election. They don't give it to him to put the money in a primary.
Right. Well, here's my point. My point is that Washington is meddling in state elections.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
That's kind of the bottom line is, I don't think Mitch McConnell necessarily wanted Roy Moore in the seat. He got his way. He didn't get a Republican, but he got his way. Now, and what I'm leading up to is, you may be facing kind of the same situation here.
Well, Mitch McConnell's already said publicly, him and his super PAC, the guy who runs the super PAC was Mitch McConnell's former chief of staff. They both come out and said they're going to spend millions of dollars to try to get Dean Heller through the primary. So they've already made it clear that they're going to come in here, meddle in the Nevada election, and try to make a difference for Dean Heller. I don't think Dean needs any help with money. He has enough of his own, but I don't think money's going to win the primary for him. It's going to, in fact, it may backfire when you have the Washington meddling like you just talked about.
All right. Well, we'll see about that. To me, it's astonishing that out-of-staters have so much to do with our elections, and it's calculated that way. So let's talk about your race. The number one, let's get the big stuff out of the way so we can then talk about issues. The number one argument against you so far is, hey, you're a five-time loser.
Listen,
you can't win this election because you've lost 5 previous elections. Let's talk about that.
Sure. Well, first of all, that's Dean Heller's talking points, and it's extremely misleading. The last election I ran in, I lost by 1%, and it was the closest race any Republican had in the state last election. And the reason why all of the Republicans up and down the ticket lost the last election was because of Dean Heller and the rest of the GOP elected officials who came out and said they would not vote for Donald Trump. They suppressed the whole turnout for the Republican Party. When you have voters on the fence, whether the GOP voters or independents or maybe soft Democrats, and they're deciding, well, who should they vote for? Well, when you hear the governor, the senator, the Senate candidate, and the congressional candidate all say, I'm not going to vote for our nominee, well, that means those people aren't going to come and vote for the Republican nominee either, or the people on that ticket. So I lose a race by 1%, closest race Nevada had last election, and it's caused by Dean Heller, and he has the audacity to use that against me to try to persuade people not to vote for me in this race. I mean, it's a ridiculous argument, it's a disingenuous argument, and it's a deceitful argument.
Okay.
But let me take.
But
No, I want to take that a step further, though.
Right.
So yes, I've been in districts, races that nobody else would have had a chance to win in, and I made those races close. My first one, the district was 18.5% more Democrats. Another one was 14.5% more Democrats. I talked about the last race, which was 1%, the closest one in Nevada. On the other hand, you got Dean Heller, who was a never-Trumper. He came out and said, I vehemently oppose a nominee. Let me be very, very clear, I do not support Donald Trump. So he's a never-Trumper. And we saw what happened when a never-Trumper ran in the general election when Joe Heck came out and said he wouldn't vote for Donald Trump. Joe Heck went from winning his race at that time by 5% to losing the race by 2%. Dean Heller was one of the first and most publicized Never Trumper. If Joe Heck couldn't win last election because he was a Never Trumper, why would Dean Heller think he could win? Or he doesn't think he can win. He's just trying to tell the voters of Nevada that he can win. But he's a Never Trump and he can't. The people who supported Donald Trump are not going to vote for him in the general election.
All right, well, let's get to Trump. I think that's an important topic to get to. But I do want to say, just to close out this particular train of thought, before you got here, I Googled Danny Tarkanian for Senate. Guess what comes up?
DannyTarkanianNews.com.
Well, I dare say it's probably not your website.
No, of course, because that's the money thing. Again, Dean Heller's spending over $500,000 every quarter. He has the last 2 quarters. He's going to spend more this quarter. We'll find out what it is at the end of January. He's spent a lot of money right now trying to deceive the public into thinking things that aren't true about myself. But that's what establishment politicians do. You know what they do? And they don't talk about their record. They don't talk about what they've done. They don't talk about the accomplishments and why they should be reelected. Instead, they lie about their opponent. So Dean Heller's put up a fake website with a bunch of lies, a bunch of deceitful statements. And what he does is he pays money. If you look at the very top, it says paid underneath each one of them. And it's because those are paid ads which move him to the top. And he's hoping to get people that don't know me personally to believe these lies that they do. But that's why people are sick and tired of the establishment. That's why they're sick and tired of politicians that lie and deceive them. And this is another example of Dean Heller doing so.
Nevada politics is brutal. You know, the folklore about Nevada is that we all hang together as Nevadans.
Exactly. I mean, that's the whole point. I'm from Nevada. I care about Nevada, and I've invested in the well-being of Nevada. Dean Heller's been, and I like Dean Heller, and I think Dean Heller was a good representative for the people of Nevada until we went back to Washington D.C. and he got caught up in the swamp up there, and he's changed. He cares more about being reelected and maintaining the power and prestige of his position than he does about the people of our state or of our country. And a perfect example of it is this. Does anybody listening to this show really think that Dean Heller thought that Hillary Clinton would be a better president than Donald Trump? Now, nobody who knows Dean Heller would think that he really thought Hillary would be a better president than Donald Trump. But if he didn't think that, then why did he say he wouldn't vote for Donald Trump, even though he was the senior senator of the state?
All right. Well, we're gonna, all right. You're going back to Trump again, so we're gonna go back to Trump. We're gonna let's just take a minute. We got to go to traffic. I'm gonna tease this next segment, and we can address this in the next segment. You hung by Trump. You stood by him after the tape, the crude tape came out during the 2016, 17, I don't remember when it was, 16 election.
Came out in October
of 16. All the other Nevada politicians scrambled to distance themselves from Trump. You did not. We're going to talk about that when we come back. But this is what you're alluding to about the never Trumpism. And you might get a chance to prove your mettle again, because there are allegations, more of the same kind of allegations coming up against Trump now. And, if you are aligned with him, we're going to ask you how you're going to endure the next battle that requires you to stand by Trump, if that's what you choose to do. It's 4:17 at News Talk 780 KOH. Time for traffic and weather together, and here is Monty Wolf in the Right Now Traffic Center. She's mainly going to be reading that book by Michael Savage, God, Faith, and Reason. Congratulations, Pam. Hope you have time to squeeze in that reading amidst all the Christmas shopping and everything else you have to do. Samantha Stone, Plan B, in the Dan Mason chair, sitting with Danny Tarkanian, who is seeking the U.S. Senate seat held by Dean Heller. And we've been talking about all of the things except the hardcore issues. Let's get down to some hardcore issues, okay?
Sounds good.
Let's start with Obamacare. Yeah, everybody hates Obamacare. I don't think you say that you'd like to make health care affordable. Well, that was the objective all year long, and all those Republicans couldn't get it done. How and why can you make a difference?
Because the first thing is, not all people dislike Obamacare. The people that have the federal subsidies and have Obamacare paid for them, they like it. The people that are on the expanded Medicaid that have everybody else pay for it, they like it. The people that don't like Obamacare are the ones that are paying for it themselves. The hardworking middle-class Americans that can barely pay for their own living expenses are the ones that are paying the biggest price for it. And I gave an example about this earlier today, and this is the truth. My family, before Obamacare, we paid $480 a month for insurance for my 4 kids and my wife and I, $1,000 deductible and a $25 copay. This year, we're going to pay $1,840 a month in health care. That's $1,400 more. Our deductible is $5,000 per person, 500% increase. And to go see a specialist, our copay is $150 a month. That's 600%. My son had a stroke 2 years ago, and he has to see 2 specialists every quarter. So that's 8 times he goes in to see a specialist. It's another $150 each. Who thinks that's fair, and why is middle-class Americans being forced to pay that bill?
Look, you're preaching to the choir on this radio station.
Okay, but that's so the problem is Dean Heller, when he came out with that infamous press conference and said he would not support the repeal and replacement of Obamacare, he said he wouldn't do it because it didn't provide, he said it would cut funding for Medicaid, which isn't true. It just decreased the amount of the increase we were going to have in it. And so he has it all wrong. Now he thinks Obamacare is bad and the replacement should provide more funding to Medicaid. I think the replacement for Obamacare needs to do something about the cost of the Affordable Care Act. The problem with the Affordable Care Act, it's not affordable, and it's a really, really misleading number.
All right, look, okay, you're singing from the same hymnal as Ted Cruz, who said pretty much the same thing. Ted Cruz was a fly in the ointment, and here's my point. Look, this is a big, messy spaghetti pot of legislation that, when I say everybody wants it repealed, like you, I mean everybody who pays for it. But you can, if you stand on principle, you end up as an outlier who kills the whole thing. And we saw that happen. People stand on, you got your mainstream versus your conservative Republicans, your so-called rhinos versus the outliers, whatever you want to call the factions. We got Republican on Republican violence here that sinks big, important pieces of legislation, made a tax package a big, complicated affair. How does somebody like you go in there for the first time? How do you make a difference in that? How do you, if you don't want to jump on board with the establishment, and you've indicated you don't, how are you going to make a difference?
The establishments are the ones that's killing these type of bills, just because what you said. The replacements that they want, they weren't doing much, if at all, in decreasing the cost of health care. Instead, they were trying to fiddle around with it, where they were trying to appease different segments of the populace. Like Dean Heller here, part of the establishment, 27-year politician, his big theme as a Republican was, I won't vote for a health care, this is what Dean Heller said, I won't vote for a health care bill that cuts the increase in Medicaid spending. That was his primary focus. That's wrong. You need to replace politics. Susan Collins from Maine was something similar, dealing with Medicaid. Lisa Murkowski, the same thing. John McCain didn't vote for it because he said that there wasn't bipartisan support. Well, there wasn't bipartisan support when they passed Obamacare. The problem here is this. What do the Republicans stand for? Republicans stand for free market principles, capitalistic principles. Create more competition within the healthcare system. You're going to get a better product at a lower cost. Allow people to purchase insurance across state lines. Give people private health savings accounts that they can take with them. One, have a deduction in their taxes when they fund it, and then be able to take it with them from job to job. There are ideas out there and proposals out there to reduce the cost of healthcare, but the people in office, the establishment, politicians we just talked about, instead of focusing on that, they focused on trying to cater to a constituency that they felt they needed to win a re-election. And again, that gets back to it again. Are you back in Washington, D.C. so you can maintain the power and prestige of being a senator, or you're back in Washington, D.C. to do what's best for the country? You do what's best for the country. That's why you should be back there.
Well, and Mr. Heller is doing what's best for Brian Sandoval. I mean, the Medicaid expansion here. Look, I've been in Nevada since 2002. When I moved here, it was a red state. I have watched Nevada go from red state to blue state under the watch of 3 successive Republican governors. So I don't know what's gone haywire here. Maybe you can explain it. But, what's the benefit, as I understand it, to the Medicaid expansion is that every single new Medicaid enrollee is compensated to the state at a greater a greater rate than the old Medicare enrollees. So there's a nice little slush
But
fund
Samantha,
there.
that was temporary to get states to expand Medicaid. They said originally the federal government pay 100% of the expansion, then 90%, then it was going to decrease. There was going to be a point that it was going to bankrupt every state that did so, including the state of Nevada. Now, Nevada decided to expand it, realizing that there was going to be a point that we were going to be held responsible for the increase in it. Furthermore, the money we're putting there is bankrupting the federal government. You know, Nevada's Medicaid expansion went up 400%, the funding for it, 400% since Obamacare was passed. The bill that Dean Heller said didn't fund Medicaid enough was going to increase it another $400 billion. Another $400 billion. So, I mean, how much is enough? And you know what the problem is? Who's paying for it? We're paying for it. The hardworking middle-class Americans that pay for their own insurance, we're subsidizing all this stuff, and that's not right. It's not right when my health insurance costs more than my mortgage, twice as much as my principal on my mortgage.
Oh, all right. So can you work with Catherine Cortez Musto? Can you work with